So I'm going to start with why we're here. Then I'm going to go over all the things that we aligned really well on based on your feedback. So thank you so much for filling out the mural. That really, really helps me a lot. And then we have a couple of areas that we need to discuss. And so the slides here are just going to be used as templates in the place for I'll type, we can talk, I'll type, and we can kind of come to some consensus around a few items. But luckily, we're pretty much on the same page going into this, so makes our jobs easier today. You guys have any questions before we get started? All right. And since I'm sharing, I can only see, how do I see everybody? Because I can only see one picture. Whatever. Zoom. They keep changing everything. Anyway, so why are we here?
It's a little toggle thing at the top, Lori, that you can change how many.
Oh, there it is. Okay, that's not what I thought that was. UX, man, it's important. All right, thanks, Jackie. All right, so why are we here? We've got some challenges. We've got at least 4 different places that I found that mention jobs to be done. That doesn't even include my merge request that's in process. That covers a lot of what we're going to talk about today. And as well as the stage group jobs to be done format. The format and the usage of them is varying, at least with the 5 places I found here. Not that much, but it's a little bit different flavors between each of the different groups. So we're really just trying to align expectations, usage, definitions, all that jazz. So these are the questions that really stood out to me from our earlier meeting that we had when we kind of brainstormed some concerns. We're going to get to almost every one of these today, so which is good. Some of these we actually came together on without having to discuss, but people want answers to those, and you'll see some memes. I like memes through this. So the first one that we're really aligned with is just like the foundation of what a job to be done is. And from the mural notes, this is where we landed. And I think this is a really good, solid foundation of what a job to be done is and how to look at it. It's a framework for understanding user behavior. You're using it to innovate product strategy. And it also includes that task that somebody or a group of people want to accomplish as part of their day-to-day function. And at any point, you guys just take yourself off and mute and be like, no, that's fine with me. I don't need to wait to the end for questions or concerns.
I'm going to chime in really quick.
Yeah, please.
So there's been a lot of debate about a task versus a job. Sorry, it's early.
Yes, we're going to get there.
Okay, so when we describe it as a task here, that signals something different to me. And so I just want to raise awareness to that.
So do you think that maybe it should be like a job instead of a task?
I think so, unless there's a better word than job, since we're defining what a job is here, right? So I think task means something different to designers.
Got it. Jackie, what were you saying?
Maybe goal.
Goal. Okay. I like that. Perfect. Because this will go straight into my merge request. So I want to make sure I get the language perfect. Thanks, Valerie, for bringing that up. The next piece was the principles. Like, what are the core job to be done principles? And these were great. I'm so glad to read these. People buy products to get a job done, right? They're not buying it for any other reason. They're persona and solution agnostic, which means they're not directed to any one persona at any one time, and they're not wrapped around the GitLab solution. It's a goal that they need to accomplish, solution aside. You have to have a foundational understanding of what jobs people need help in getting done. What are they trying to do? You have to figure that out first. And jobs are consistent even if the technology changes, which is why you're trying to get away from the solution. And they're not a user story. So I thought this was great. Questions, concerns, disagreements?
Might change in the
Ian,
third bullet.
I can
Where
barely hear
say
you.
jobs people need to help. Oh no.
I think your
Technology,
microphone
it never works when I need it to.
It's okay.
Is this any better?
Yeah, there you
go. Could we change, or maybe think about where it says requires a foundational understanding of what jobs people need to do, just to mirror what we said earlier and change jobs to goals?
Yes. How's that? Perfect. Yes, keep me honest. 5 hours of sleep does not do me good. All right, so where are we getting these jobs to be done from? And overwhelmingly, you guys agree it's coming from research, either through observation or interviewing people who could be impacted or is using the product, understanding their underlying motivations for what they're doing, and trying to expose unmet needs that they may not even be aware of. We're also looking at market assumptions and competitive landscape as well to understand what those jobs to be done might be. Yeah. Anything missing from here? Anything? Right. Excellent.
Well, I would say,
yeah.
I think the way you're stating it is where jobs to be done come from, like currently at GitLab, or where they should come from, because I think currently at GitLab, sometimes our jobs to be done come from looking at our product and then,
yeah.
Right. So I'm reading this
it
as
should be what it should be do. Yeah. Yeah. This whole hour today is to come out with what should be happening here. And so we understand that it's not, which is why we're here. So that's a good catch, Jackie. All right. So then the next thing was about needs. So there was one of the questions on the mural around how needs are factoring into jobs to be done. And we aligned on that pretty well as well. Because jobs to be done help define the scope, you keep the user needs at the forefront, and it allows for the how might we discussions to happen in order to innovate. And then talking about the desired outcome, which is very closely related to needs, helps strategists think outside the box. Again, innovation. And then when you understand the job, you can dig into the needs and desired outcomes. So if you start with the needs without thinking about the job, you might miss some of the needs, and you have to go back again and go around the whole circle again and again and again. Anything here that I didn't catch or we should add to make sure that GitLab understands how jobs to be done relates to needs and desired outcomes? And I have to say, this is pretty much in alignment with all of the jobs to be done thinkers out there, Kalbach and Ulrich and the other people. I always forget, the rewired people. Okay, all right, so those are the things that we agree on. Yay. That's going to help us to have these other conversations that will take up the rest of the time that we're here for today. So there were some things that we didn't quite align with. I suspect one of them I think was a vocabulary misalignment, I think on my part. We'll talk about it, but the others, we're not all that disparate, but we just have those different flavors bringing to the table. So I just want to have an agreement on those. And here, these are the things we're going to talk through. I've got slides to support these, so you don't have to remember any of this. They're on the slides to come. So the first one is the structure. And then after we talk about this, we're going to talk about levels. And Valerie, that's where your job task, user story conversation is going to sit for the most part. So the next part is really kind of just how a job to be done is like structured grammatically, if anything else. So you've got your strategy people, that's the Ulrich dude, and you've got the jobs to be done playbook, that's the Kalbach dude. And they both look at it in terms of like a verb, a noun, a contextual clarifier. Callback looks at it as a circumstance plus a job stage step. Then you've got a micro job, and then you have a need. That's kind of how he does his. And then what I did here was I had you guys give me how you felt a job to be done should be grammatically organized. And I wrote them out here. So they go from the top to the bottom, just so you could see the three that I got from everybody. So they're similar. So like you've got situation or circumstance, you've got a job, the noun, I guess it would be a verb, and then how they need to do it, to the need or the contextual clarifier. So we're not that far off from what those two guys are proposing in their practice. We just need to figure out what we're going to do here at GitLab. So this will come back. So don't worry about trying to remember all of that. But I wanted to go over specifically what they both view the grammatical construction of a job to be done. So Strategen has two things that they go off of. They have what they call a job statement, which is that verb, noun, and contextual clarifier. Then they have a separate outcome statement, which talks about like the KPI and the object of control and the contextual clarifier. It's real technical. And then you've got callbox, which is the when I blank, I want to blank so I can blank. Very similar to a user story, not quite the same, but very similar, but at a higher level. What do you guys think about these two approaches here?
I feel like I need some examples, or I need to think of some,
Yeah, I had one in here, but the outcome statement was very muddied and I couldn't even pick out the performance metric from the example that I found. So
an
I took
outcome
it out.
statement might be like increase trials. What's object of control?
That would be trials, I suppose.
Yeah.
So increase the number of new people starting each trial for self-hosted, or something might be like the contextual clarifier.
I suppose.
I would say I'm very more familiar with the first kind of structure where it's a verb, object of the verb, and then contextual clarifier. I would say I haven't ever created a job to be done leveraging an outcome statement before.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I don't really understand what's the difference between a direction of an improvement and the combination of a performance metric and object of control.
Yeah, the Strategen practice is ODI, and it's very quantitative. It's 89 steps. It's 89 steps to go through to get your job and your outcome. I mean, it's crazy. Like you're doing surveys, you're doing quantitative segments, like it's insane. So I wonder if that's why they have those things in there in that outcome statement, because it's like he splits it up, which was interesting.
Yeah, it's almost like you can use your outcome statement to test like how well you're meeting the job. Right?
Yes, which is what his practice really is. Like you define it and then you're going to test against it using the further statements. Yeah. Valerie, Ian, what do you guys think?
I am a lot more familiar with the second, the job to be done option, the when I want to so I can. It probably because it does feel very familiar to a user story. And so that's just what I've worked with, and it fits a lot of what I like, the mental model of what I've been working in. Usually whenever I've used a job to be done, there's an entire other step of like, how do we use data to verify or validate that we've done a good job accomplishing the job, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. And that's very much callbox approach to jobs to be done, to kind of define it and then you define how you're going to measure it kind of separately, where Strategen's kind of trying to put it all together. Valerie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I second what Ian just said. This is, I think, more familiar to designers. It's what I've used in the past, so I'm more familiar with it. And sorry, filled this portion of the mural board this morning.
Oh,
I think I had two.
sorry.
I had two remaining stickies that I just finished filling out. But yeah, I use this format. It can be confusing though because it's so close to a user story. So I'll give it that. But I do think it's easier to provide a simplified format like this to anybody who's going to be writing a job to be done, because it's literally a formula that you just plug in.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, from a product management standpoint, it's very similar to the strategy and job statement, but it's still different. You're my PM rep because Keenan he got pulled into a Dell conversation. So what do you think, like if we prescribe or we strongly suggest that GitLab adopt this way to formulate job statements?
I would say I did that for my release management jobs to be done because I saw that was the trend that we were using. That's what you recommended. So I just mapped the job statement that I was used to using at my previous job to the when I want to, so I can framework.
How did you map that? How did that work?
So typically I would organize job statements by persona. And that would allow you to just group the different actions that you're expecting a specific user to take in light of the goal that they're trying to accomplish. So it was more just taking that persona grouping and clarifying that circumstance that I'm hoping that user to go through. So that they can accomplish what the desire that I have outlined in the object of the verb in the noun of the first statement. So it was more like kind of like just translating from a sentence structure to another sentence structure. Wasn't really
yeah. I just didn't know how you mapped those different pieces because they use like the contextual clarifier. He's using a micro job. I think they're kind of the same thing. It's just a different word for it, but I don't want to assume.
I would say contextual clarifier is a combination of the circumstance and the micro job. So, because the object, the noun, is also something that can be a micro job too.
Even though a job is something that you do, which would be a verb?
It's actually, it would be a task. So if we look at I want to plan a deployment, the deployment would be the object of the verb. The verb is plan. So the circumstance is planning a deployment. When I want to plan a deployment, I want to see my deployment, which is the contextual clarifier from the micro job, so I can deliver value to my end users. That's back to the verb.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the fact that they have like a very objective view of a task in the job statement, it kind of centralizes the results around that object.
Gotcha. Okay. And what do you guys think about having that additional job stage or a step here in conjunction with the circumstance? We're going to talk about those a little bit more, but right now, what are your thoughts?
What's an example of a job stage?
It's when he's jumping ahead because we're going to get there, but like mapping out a job. So maybe my job is I want to go visit my mom for Mother's Day, but I need to rent a car in order to do that. So what is the whole process of that job? I decide I want to go visit. I look up car rentals. I make a reservation. I travel. I do go try to pick up the car. What if the car's not there? What happens? Like it's all of those stages of that job. That's what he's referencing, or steps. So I want to do a deployment. What are the steps included in that process? Is there a specific job stage or step that I'm talking about in this job statement here?
So I don't know if you have this maybe later in the deck, but I have this kind of strong opinion about the job statement format, in that it encourages these very long, wordy statements. And like sometimes I've seen like handbook pages with jobs written, and there's just tons of text to read. And it becomes very repetitive because sometimes the circumstance and the job stage and step is the same for many micro jobs, you know, or the need might be the same for many micro jobs and circumstances. It just depends. So I'd like to see us like talk about when you use a job statement. Like I think they work really well when you need it to stand all by itself. But then I think when you are trying to like help somebody understand what is the whole picture of your top job and then the smaller jobs, to use a job map where your statements are really short. Like I shared the one that we have for growth is like auto renew my account, pay for my subscription, like really quick things where you don't necessarily need to include every single one of the pieces of the job statement.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Jackie, go ahead.
No, that's all. I just wanted to say that. So I guess what I'm saying is it depends on like what this job statement is, like what purpose it's serving, whether or not it makes sense to include like circumstance, job stage and step, need, etc.
Yeah, and so what you're speaking to, we will get to, is you're speaking to the granularity and the altitude of jobs.
Kind
you
of.
are, yeah, because you're talking about a big job. I want to renew my subscription. That's the big job. And then there are these micro jobs or more granularity that you can get. Like, what does that mean to renew your subscription? I need to make sure my credit card's up to date. I need to go online to Netflix and know my password. These are all subsequent things that relate to that bigger job. So we do have to talk. That's like the bulk of our discussion, I think, today.
Is the granularity. It's more the granularity though, I would say, because say you have like your job is to upgrade or something, depending on who you are, like what persona you are, depending on what circumstances you're in, there might be like 10 job statements around that with different circumstances, with different needs. But yeah, so I guess it's also the granularity of the statement and like where the statement is living. Like, is it an issue where it's only one statement and you need all of that information? Or is it a big epic where you don't necessarily need to write 700 words because you're repeating similar stages for, 30 different micro jobs?
Altitude and granularity. Yes. That was my 9 o'clock last night epiphany. Yes. I think when we get into it, I think you'll see that it is what you're talking about, but it's just a different lens on it. Because the problem is people are writing novels when it should probably be a little bit shorter, and then maybe they're not capturing the detail when they need to. And so we'll talk about that. So go ahead, Valerie.
I don't want to jump too ahead, and I don't even know if it's what's ahead, but I think there's confusion between when to use a job statement and when to use a user story, and how user stories roll up into a job statement, just like tasks. So I do think it's like the levels of the layers or whatever we're calling it. But I think that's part of, like, when I go and look in the handbook and I see even the ones that are written for secure and defend, I'm seeing more user stories that are written in the format of a job statement.
I agree. And I think part of it is we haven't agreed on the grammatical structure of what a job to be done statement looks like. And then we have not talked about how that is different from how we use user stories and tasks as well. So they're all conflating it because it looks very similar grammatically. When I need to do this, I want to do this because this. And it's very, very similar. So I think that's part of it. As well as the granularity and the altitude as well. So it sounds like so far at this moment in time, we don't have to agree completely yet, but for the grammatical structure, it sounds like this this second, when I blank, I want to blank so I can blank, is being leaned towards more that, because it makes a little bit more sense. It's what people are used to, for better, for worse. So we'll keep that in mind as we move forward. We can always come back and change our mind. So that was what this was going to be. So I will just I'm going to copy what Jim had here and put that over here, because it's basically what we just decided on. We can come back and change it if we need to. Now, the fun stuff, different levels. Based on what I had in the mural when I looked at it yesterday, we all kind of agreed on this kind of roll up structure or roll down structure, depending on how you want to look at it. So you have a job. It's a high level scenario that spurs a customer to buy or hire a product. And then from that, that's where your user stories come from. That's more granular. It's a workflow or a scenario, if you will, that describes a series of tasks somebody has to do to accomplish the outcome. And then under that, of course, you have your tasks that you're actually going to do. This is the action that you need to take in order to go to the next step. So this was pretty much what came out of that mural. If we disagree, let's talk. But this is how I interpreted what you guys gave me as the notes. And I just kind of duplicated, because sometimes you can have more than one user story and task, but you could also just have this one job, one story, one task, depending on what's going on.
I see jobs to be done as a replacement for user stories, not like in addition to. So, but we can just keep going and I'll roll with it.
So when I thought about this and answering the question on the board, I started to think about when I create an epic, typically that's a workflow that I have described in the form of a job to be done. And a user story is a component that we need to deliver as a part of that global job. So that would be the specific action that we're expecting a user to take in order to accomplish the workflow that we're describing in the job to be done.
I see. So it's not a task. It is the task. It is the task, but you're not.
It's a
going through a workflow
for that. Yeah, like the job to be done can be a series of workflow steps, and then the user story is a specific part of the workflow, and then the tasks are the actions of that workflow.
And I think that that's where we're getting conflated between the job and the user story. Again, it's that granularity level of where it should fall. And it's going to get fun, because in a couple of slides, I'm going to do the whole UX research, it depends thing too. We'll talk about it. But I think part of what will help clarify things at GitLab is if we can agree that we start somewhere and we go down here with a lens and we go down here with a lens. Because this is where people are getting confused. Do I start at the user story level with my job to be done, which is why you're seeing a lot of those paragraphs written, or Valerie, you're seeing, and I saw some of those, they're not at all a job to be done. They're a scenario. It's weird. But they're getting it conflated between the two. So Jackie, tell me more. Like, I want to understand from your perspective the workflow piece and how that is related or isn't related to like the job and the grammatical structure we just talked about. Like, I want to do this so I can because.
Sure. So I would say that the job to be done is the overarching justification for purchasing our solution. So I want to, when a user wants to plan a multi-project deployment, I want to go to a single place to view my deployments so I can reduce confusion across my teams. Well, this is a super broad, overarching outcome and multi-level steps. I would break that down into at least 4 user stories to talk about building a dashboard for that user to go to a single place. I would break down the mechanics by which a deployment is defined and the documentation for that deployment, and I would even break another user story down into the workflow by which they would land on that dashboard to organize their deployments, because that is a different path and a journey that you'll have to consider if you're addressing more than one persona. And then those specific tasks of, I need to then notify people from that dashboard view, or I want to be able to connect or jump off of other places, is like follow-up issues or stories that expands this overall workflow of coordinating a deployment across multiple projects. So the job to be done is the entry point for why someone would consider the release management group or stage. The user story is that specific steps or series of actions they're going to conduct in order to feed into that specific job. And then the task of what they're actually doing on that dashboard is like a subset.
Right. So I was trying to figure out, like, initially I felt like I heard that there was another layer between job and user story, but when you just said that right there, I don't think there is. I think it is this.
I agree with this breaking down. I would say something that I would like to see is connecting, how would we organize this inside of the GitLab framework? So like, at what point do we see jobs present themselves for product managers and designers? At what point do we see a user story surfaced? And at what point do we deliver a task for a user? Because I think that's where, like, some product managers may only use tasks as issues, or may not even create an issue to deliver a task for a user, but rather everything is kept at a user story. It'd be interesting to see that part.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree with everything that Jackie was saying. I think there's just a subtle nuance that's different. And Jackie, just tell me I heard you wrong. It's okay. But the job is agnostic to the product, right? Remembering like slide 2 or 3. And so the workflow is actually within the user story, because the job is like, they can go anywhere to do this thing. They just have this thing that they need to go and do, and this is why they need to do it. And then when they get into the user stories, it's very product centric. So it's like, at GitLab, this is the way that they would complete this. Is that
completely agree? Mainly because I would never create a deliverable from a job alone, because that's, again, like, I want to manage deployments in a single place. That is such a generic concept that a user story helps me render what that means for GitLab instrumentation.
But even I want to manage it in a single place is how they would go about doing that, right? So I think I would up-level the job even higher than that. Why do they want it centralized?
Well, when I was instead of using the former job statement that I have used before, if I was to use the new grammatical structure, when I am coordinating deployment across multiple projects, I want to see my deployments in a single place so I can deliver value for my customers. We have that structure.
Got it.
The goal is to like reduce confusion and deliver value for my customers out of a single origin point, which is a user story that which is a job to be done that I've created user stories from in real life.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I think we're in agreement. Ian, what are your thoughts?
I really agree with what everyone's been saying. From the package side, because we handle quite a few different categories, the job tends to align with the category. So the package registry has one job to be done that it hopes to accomplish. And then that involves a few different user stories. And each user story tends to have the many individual tasks it takes to actually accomplish that goal. Then beside the package registry, we have the dependency proxy, which has its own like high level need of, you need one place to get all of your stuff from everywhere, because it's really confusing otherwise. And then here's the user stories to accomplish it. Each user story has tasks to be completed. So it seems like I'm in alignment with what everyone's saying, I think, if I understand correctly.
When we say user story, are we talking about the like statement that starts with a persona?
Yes.
So
should be the workflow, like the whatever software developer needs to.
Yeah. I don't use them with jobs at all. Like I think of them as like, you know, like we're not going to use user stories because we use jobs to be done. And jobs to be done,
Not the same thing.
It's a situational focus instead of a persona focus.
Oh, I disagree with that
You
pretty
know,
strongly. Let me see if I can figure out words to articulate why I viscerally disagree with that. So I would say jobs to be done are an entry point for any user, buyer, agnostic of tool to evaluate our solution. And a user story focuses in that flow, that scenario to be rendered in our product and meet that expectation of the market. Like the job, it almost informs the user story of any persona because it's justification for why that solution exists. You have to have a job in order to have a user story.
So in like the jobs to be done book, they call that like the job performers. So you have your job to be done, you have job performers, and then you specify at a lower granularity what those job performers need to do. So I mean, I think it's just semantics. It's like the same purpose, but I guess I just get confused when we talk about them as user stories, because to me, I'm like, well, we're not using that format. And if we want to use both jobs and user stories, we have so many words and formats for people to follow that it becomes kind of confusing. Yeah, I think it's hard to sort of articulate that as well, but I think that maybe part of the reason our jobs are like they're actually user stories very often is because we are using both and we haven't defined the differences between them.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
I think that's likely. I also think that we've never, or we're not used to up-leveling. We're very much like sitting on our desk with our heads down, looking at the thing that this feature does and what these users are doing. And jobs allow us to sit at our desk and raise our head up and look around. And that's what I love about jobs, because it makes you abstract from what it is specifically that you're doing or that this user is attempting to do. It makes sure that you're including multiple personas or multiple user types, because we oftentimes get very locked into, the software developer. Software developer does X, Y, and Z because of these things. So I love this structure personally because it forces us to think differently. It forces us to think about what situation is this person actually in, or any a group of people. A job is very like persona agnostic, right? We mentioned that earlier in the thing. So you can have multiple user types or personas or whatever you want to call them doing the same job, but the differences of how they go about doing completing their objective is through the user stories. So their motivation might actually be slightly different. I think at a higher level it's the same, but when you get down to like a software developer versus like I don't know, a security analyst, they actually could be going through the same process, but one jumps off into a different part of the DevOps workflow than the other, but they're still completing the same job, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's nuance. I think you're right though, Jackie, that we have to lock in on the vocabulary, and then we have to be very prescriptive, which is like anti-GitLab culture, and the way that we use these things and say, this is when we use a user story, and this is when we use a job, and this is the relationship between these two things.
Yeah, and I think if we can give them examples, we will probably not have to be so prescriptive. This is what this looks like. This is what this looks like. This is how you use these things. And it'll come a little bit more naturally to people, because right now they're just trying to pick something and put the thing in there because they're told to. So let me get on to a couple more slides, because a lot of what we're talking about is on here, and I want to get your thoughts on that too, because it's very interesting. So altitude, we've been talking about altitude, and these questions that we just were talking about, like what's the best size for it, what's the best level, how do you map them to cross stage group, different levels of abstraction. These are all dealing with granularity and altitude. And the two guys look at this differently. So I wanted to explain to you how they both do it. So Stratogen, and this is where it's like 89 steps. They've got their core functional job at the top, and that's the job the end user is trying to get done. That's a one single statement job using that grammar that I showed you earlier. Then after a long set of lot of quantitative and qualitative research, you could come up with 50 to 150 desired outcome statements. This is average for them. And then from that, you come up with these related jobs, emotional jobs, and consumption chain jobs. It's very interesting. Yes, so that's kind of how he handles this idea of altitude and granularity. Callbox a little bit different. He's got these terms that he calls, he files them into 4 categories. Aspirations. Here's an example. I want to enjoy the freedom of mobility. That's an aspiration. He's got a big job, which is what we've been talking about, that short sentence, I want to do this thing, or I want to make a difference in my life by doing this thing. He's got things that he calls little jobs, which might be a smaller, more practical job that corresponds roughly to the stages in a big job. And then he's got a micro job, which he conflates with tasks. So he kind of breaks it down that way instead of having to start with 120 outcome statements, desired outcome statements. He just kind of breaks down that big job into basically this structure, just using a couple of different terms to denote that. So that's how they're approaching it. Those are the two big differences with it. And the other piece that Kalbach brings in is this granularity piece, which is what we've been talking through this morning. And it uses the questions why and how to move your focus. So Valerie, like you mentioned, you are completely correct. We are very micro-focused. We are very focused on those lower level jobs. It's very hard for us to move, especially in the design org, to move higher to the higher level jobs. You do that through asking why. So if you want to get to the higher, that one statement, nice little aspirational job, have a better life, you ask questions. Why would somebody want to go to a conference, whoever this job performer is? Why do they want to develop professional skills at this conference? So then they want to do that to advance their career. Why do they want to advance their career? To have a better life. So you're asking the question why to get to the higher level, broader job. If you need to get more specificity, you really want to understand what are the tasks involved, what are the workflows involved, you ask how. Okay, so he wants to go to a conference, right, to have a better life. How is he going to attend that conference? He needs to convince his boss to let him go. So how is he going to convince his boss to let him go? He needs to provide a cost-benefit estimation of the event. How is he going to provide that? That's your micro job. You're getting down to the level of more specificity by diving into it from that lens. So, and this is where I pull my UX research card. It depends, kind of depends on what your goal is for that job, for that user story, for that task. But how you get there is using Kalbach's framework of asking the why and the how to move up and down on that granularity levels. Let's discuss. And I'm happy to navigate anywhere in the presentation you guys want me to. And there's a link in the agenda if you guys want to pull it up yourself as well.
I was just going to say that I think this is an awesome exercise for people to do in their stage groups in order to balance the looking out and kind of getting outside of your area and understanding context and then drilling back in. It's really useful.
Have any of you used the double diamond design thinking approach?
Which one? Did they just redo it like a couple of years ago?
Yeah, they may have.
It's been a while.
I'm thinking of IBM in like 2018 came out with this double diamond design thinking approach. And it reminds me of this because you start really narrow and then you go back broad and then you go really narrow and then back broad and really narrow. And it's like the whole life cycle of how you should be thinking about the problems after you ship a feature. So how do you change the context of somebody working once you deliver an incremental value add? And sometimes in GitLab, since we have such a focus on iteration, we introduce a change that causes the job to be done to shift dramatically. So the original job to be done is no longer relevant because we've introduced a new way to do something. And this happens with products and companies that are market disruptors.
I'm confused by that though, Jackie, because by definition, the job to be done should be agnostic to the product. And it's always the same job.
But that's exactly what I'm saying, is that the expectation is now I need as a user to perform my job in a different way as a result of this tool. So like mobile interfaces.
Oh, so we're defining how people do it, not like their job is the same, like they want to deploy some software or whatever, but we're dictating how.
Exactly. So that's where this kind of framework was useful, because when you start introducing these changes, you can sometimes need to reevaluate that highest level job and then drill back down into the user story or the task that you're trying to accomplish. So I would say that with the progressive delivery side and with feature flags of a release stage, they're constantly having to bubble back up higher level and kind of be aspirational, because they're introducing new ways that are defining how customers decide to continuously deliver their offering. And that expectation changes the way that we're going to develop solutions in the future. That's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. So I might just be a little confused, Jackie, and I'd love your response to this idea. It feels like when we look at the user stories and we introduce a new solution and we have to change the user story because we've done something really innovative, doesn't the hierarchical job above it stay the same? So if we introduce a way that you can, you want to be able to deploy your software really easily. We originally had user stories that were like, you have to do this step and this step and this step to deploy it. But now we've come up with this solution that just auto deploys everything for you. The job story stayed the same, right? I still need to deploy my code, but the user story is completely shifted because we basically did away with all the steps you had to do.
So I would say,
does that resonate with you, or do you think the job story would still have to change?
I would say in some time, I think initially it depends. I have 2 use cases with release orchestration right now, for example, where it says, when I want to see the status of my deployments in production, I want to be able to use my existing tool sets so that I can easily transition my release candidates to production. So this is a trouble, because we learned that the market has a high expectation for their legacy tools to be supported in their deployment framework. So that job to be done is, how do I create from a user story, the user story I'm going to create from that job to be done is, how do I then create a plug and play tool set that allows customers to view their environments of external deployments from GitLab, because we want to support their existing tool sets. But then I introduce that feature in the market that now I ingest external deployments. The job to be done then kind of shifts a little bit, because we're no longer, after we reevaluated that customer base in this particular instance, they now are starting to use GitLab for continuous delivery. So then their experiences become less about supporting external deployments and shift to becoming more about improving the GitLab toolset experience. So the job to be done then shifts to, I want to more effectively or more efficiently deploy code to my production environments rather than the existing toolset performance. Or maybe it's that job to be done was completed and executed and we expired it, and the job to be done then shifted, which I guess could happen, but haven't ever expired a job to be done before.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever have either, because they're so broad. They
Yeah.
usually, unless your product just decides we're not shipping DVDs anymore as Netflix, so we're gonna just put all those jobs to be done aside. Usually that doesn't, like, your business model has to change dramatically to, I think, put them to bed. Yeah.
So with that one, it evolved from external tool sets and creating an integration framework for tracking external deployments to then becoming more about tracking deployments with the GitLab toolset. So this is where the job to be done evolved.
You kind of struggle with the definition. I like to be pretty literal about things, and the job to be done definition is it's technology agnostic. But by definition, what we were talking about in the world of software is like,
yeah, I know.
Oh,
I struggle with that too.
Right?
I struggle with that too. Yeah.
I ladder all the way up to like, I want to make my software product awesome. But
you almost have to go all the way to the aspirational, like, I just want to sit back and push a button and not have to worry about anything kind of thing. Yeah, it's hard because we are a technology company. So in that, call box says you can start at an aspirational level, but you're never going to make a product if you stay there. You have to then come back down all the way down to the micro job, which is basically a task. So you know what you're building. But by the time you get down there, you know why you're building it and how it should be used to accomplish that goal that user or person has for that task. Does any of this help with our discussions that we've been having about, like, how like what we were having the discussion, where's my mouse, on this slide around grammar and what a user story is? And
well, let me ask a question. Are we saying that like a user story is a little job or a micro job? The task is like a micro job, or are these different things? Because we have two different sets of vocabulary.
Exactly, and I think that is the problem, and that's the problem I have in his book too. It's two sets of vocabularies, because basically what he says here is that you could write a job to be done for any of these, but it's at the level of granularity that you write it, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with that statement. So no longer does it have to have a better life at every level. You get more granular with the job to be done structure. So that grammatical structure here, you get much more granular with. The lower you go, the closer you get to the task here on this.
So as your job is granular, do you need the user stories?
Is it a user story? Or
at that point,
a granular job to be done? Yeah, I was like, can I just cut 20 pages out of this book? Because like that's where I got when I read it as well. And I think for us, it's just a decision. Do we want to call those user stories, which is perfectly fine in my perspective, or do we want to call them granular jobs to be done?
Little jobs.
I want to call them user stories, and this is my pitch. Designers and product managers are already accustomed to the concept of user stories. They've been doing it their entire career. For us to disrupt that, I think would be very difficult. The other thing, if we do all these different levels of jobs, we get into a situation like we are today where we can't write at the appropriate level or the right altitude for the actual job that we're talking about in this purple box. And so I think that having clear distinction between these and using terminology that we're already accustomed to. So at this point, we're only introducing one new thing to the UX department, and that is the job. And so if we can clearly—
a high-level job.
Yeah, the high-level job. So that's my preference, is that let's only introduce one new thing, which is how we're going to write a job to be done, what it's for, how we use it, and then allow them to continue to use user stories and tasks, because our designers are really good at writing user stories and tasks, and I don't want to muddy that for them.
So Valerie, when you say user stories though, are you talking about user stories like we write them at GitLab where we use the job to be done grammar? Or are you talking about user stories like user stories
as a
as
security analyst,
a
I want to, yeah.
Yeah, because I think it gets confusing there.
Because if we remember that a job is agnostic to a persona, but user stories allow us to actually bring in the persona via a user type. Like we wouldn't say Sam wants to do this. Sam is our security analyst. It would be, as a security analyst, I want to, so that I can do whatever. I think it's really important to separate that format from the job so that we can get to the altitude that we want. And I think that the altitude for GitLab is there's multiple forms. I think that there's one that should occur at the category level, like the stage group level. And by one, I mean that there will be more, but this is the tier. Mm-hmm. The lowest tier of the job would be at the category or stage group level. Then there should be stage jobs to be done. And then there should be cross stage, where we're actually looking at how things are traversing across the system. So for security, we're heavily involved in what's going on with the MR widget. And so we have jobs that people want to accomplish that span across, basically the entire experience. Or we do target user stories that roll up into these jobs for software developers. And so as they're looking at the MR screen, for example, they need to do these certain things, but they all have the ultimate goal of making sure that they don't ship code that's going to create vulnerabilities for their company, right?
So for like a UX scorecard, Valerie, I'm picturing a job. Mm-hmm. And then underneath it, you might write some user stories that talk about like which personas do the job. And so your scorecard would be one job, but potentially you would do an evaluation for multiple user stories for different personas, different scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your participants for that evaluation would be who you intend that job, who you think that job is done or completed by. And just like a usability study, you can actually start at a job level, but when you're writing your script, you're at the task level. And that's why there's a really close relationship between task and user story and job.
Yep. Yes. I would like to propose that I find another time for us to finish this, because this is a really good discussion.
Yeah. I think, Lori, maybe how many more slides do you have?
I've got plenty, and then I've got another presentation that I need to switch over for in like a minute. So
maybe you can kind of think through like what decisions did we make? What did we sort of decide today? And then we can build on that and finish in another hour.
I think so. Yeah, I'll recap for you guys what we talked about. And like I said, the link to this is in the meeting invite anyway, so you guys can look through as much as you want before, and I'll find us another hour for us to chat. This was perfect. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, I'm early for the next
meeting. That's okay, Sal. It's all right.